Welcome to the eShopperReviews podcast, episode 14. This is the podcast for May 2022. I'm Jen Ip.
And I'm Jake McNeil.
For those new to this podcast, eShopperReviews is a subreddit on reddit.com where Jake reviews games on the Nintendo Switch platform, and you can find the subreddit at the URL reddit.com/r/eShopperReviews. We currently have over 1,800 reviews and counting, and we are supported by your donations on our Patreon, which you can find at patreon.com/eShopperReviews. This month's sponsors are Andy Miller, Xleen, Johannes, Reddit user RamboFox, Ilya Zarev, Connor Armstrong, Eli Goodman, KH, Christopher Wolf, and Stove. Thank you all for helping to keep the reviews coming. Now on to the patron-voted games.
Last month, if you'll recall, I did something a little different, which was I gave our patrons a choice of 8 games to vote for and said whatever the top 2 would end up being the ones that would get reviewed. And we kind of have a 3-way tie now.
Yeah, I was about to say, there's 3.
Which means I get to be the tiebreaker, and I actually, as of this recording, I have not quite yet decided which of these 3 games, which 2 of these 3 games, rather, will be the ones that I will go for.
Okay, so we have Chicory, A Colorful Tale, Death's Door, and Shovel Knight Pocket Dungeon.
All 3 of these I've heard really good things about, and yeah, I guess we'll find out shortly into the month which ones I end up deciding to go for.
Alright, so next month's vote includes Mario Strikers Battle League, Fire Emblem Warriors 3 Hopes, Sonic Origins, AI The Somnium Files, Nirvana Initiative.
So of these 4, I can't help but feel like Mario Strikers Battle League is the one that's getting the most attention.
And if not that one, then maybe Sonic Origins?
I don't know, because Sonic Origins is a compilation of... Okay, so it's a compilation. They actually just announced it fairly recently, exactly what was going to be in it, rather. And that is going to contain Sonic the Hedgehog, Sonic CD, which is weird because it came after all the others that they put it in that order. But anyway, Sonic CD, Sonic 2, and Sonic 3 and Knuckles, which is a combination of Sonic the Hedgehog 3 and Sonic and Knuckles, which were originally conceived as one game, released separately, but Sonic and Knuckles had this lock-on technology that added content to the previous games in the series, all of which is going to be included here, along with they're adding in new modes, like there's going to be a new widescreen mode, and there's like multiple different kinds of, like there's a special edition that includes bonus content and stuff. It's kind of a little gross that they're going that route with a compilation of old games, but...
Okay, maybe not Sonic Origins.
Well,
then.
I figured these 4 games seemed like probably the biggest standouts for the month of June. And so all of these I'm hoping to get around to reviewing at some point during this year, but I figure one of them I can get a jump start on. I know that Mario Strikers is the one that's gotten the most hype online, at least from what I can see.
I can understand that.
But I figured, there are some Sonic fans out there too. Fire Emblem Warriors might have some fans out there, and AI The Somnium Files is kind of, I guess, the dark horse candidate of this, which is more of, I'm not sure if I'd say an indie game, but it's definitely not as major a franchise as those other ones. But the first AI, The Somnium Files, was really, really good. And so I'm definitely looking forward to the sequel as well. But in the end, whatever people vote for, I would be happy to review any of these. Hopefully all of them at some point.
All right, moving on to the highlights for this month of April 2022. Just a note here, these are not necessarily games released in April, but games reviewed in the last month. And we'll start by talking about the worst games.
The worst games?
Yeah.
Oh, you're going all the way... Okay.
Not all the way down, but Guitar. That's really the name of it?
Yeah, it's just Guitar. And so I spent an entire week during this last month reviewing apps on Nintendo Switch. Things that are not technically games, but that are software that you can get for the Nintendo Switch. And A lot of the ones that I reviewed are just trying to imitate some sort of musical instrument or do some sort of basic task.
Mm-hmm.
Guitar aims to be just like you're playing the guitar using the touchscreen on your Nintendo Switch. Technically, there are button controls too, but the issue is it does not indicate at all how you're supposed to control this game, and the way that you're naturally inclined to play a guitar involves touching at multiple points.
Yeah.
So you would think that, you know, there'd be some sort of multi-touch thing involved, or maybe buttons and touchscreen. I don't know how exactly the best way to go about that would be, but this is not it. The Nintendo Switch, I'm not sure how well it can detect multiple points of touch on the touchscreen. I know that it can detect at least two, because there are games that require you to, you know, pinch and pull, like you would on your phone. But once you start putting like multiple fingers down like you would for a guitar, I feel like accuracy just goes out the window. And okay, so maybe they do something using the controller buttons to compensate for that. I don't know. In the end, no matter what I tried to do with this application, nothing made sense, nothing worked properly, and the actual application itself does not want to tell you how it is supposed to be used. It is very opaque, and it just ends up being useless. And I'm not a guitar pro. I don't know how to play guitar. I have a basic understanding of how to do it. I've played the plastic guitar on Rock Band, although I know that is not the same thing.
No, it's not.
But none of that helps me to understand what the heck this game wants me to do to even do the most basic stuff on the guitar. It's even more so than any of the other music apps on the Switch, which are usually pretty simple and not a good representation of the instrument they're trying to replicate. This, more so than any of those, is just worthless. I see no use for it.
Okay, so you also reviewed another app, and you also ranked it as one of your worst games for this month, called it's called Piano.
Yes. So not all of the instruments were terrible, but a lot of them were. And Piano is really bad, not just because it's simple. I mean, it is a pretty simple, you know, you push the button on the piano and it plays the thing, which is kind of what you'd expect. But the issue with Piano, okay, so there's a few things. First of all, it only has 8 keys. And if you want to have any kind of decent ability to play a piano, you kind of need a bit more than that. But even if you want to play just a simple melody, it doesn't have any of the sharps and flats. All of those black keys on a keyboard, they do nothing on this app. They are just there for show. And it's like, come on. If you're going to give me the basic bare bones of trying to present a piano on the Nintendo Switch, the least you can do is actually allow me to play all of the keys that are on the screen.
Yeah, I mean, a baby's toy has more options than that.
Yeah, exactly. And the funny thing is if I wanted to play piano on my Nintendo Switch, if I really wanted to actually play piano, so I have 2 options that I think are better ways to go. And 3 options depending on how you want to go about it. And it depends if you want more of a game, if you want more of the general experience of playing a piano, or if you want to actually have some very, very loose simulation of a piano. If you're looking for more of a simulation, something to replace this as an app, your best bet is to go for the Nintendo Labo kit that includes a cardboard piano that you construct for the Nintendo Switch. It's very silly. It's not going to replace a real-life piano or keyboard by any stretch, but at the very least, all of the keys work.
Wow.
And you actually get the visceral feel of tapping the keys. It's unusual. It's not... like, it's basically you're making a toy piano, but that's still better than what's here.
Mm-hmm.
If you're looking for something more of a game that actually gives you more of the feel of playing a piano rather than actually simulating a piano, the demo games.
Yes, I was going to suggest that.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, those are not accurate representations of playing a piano, but playing the game, you get that feel of what it's kind of like to play the piano.
I agree.
Like the what is it called, an arpeggio or whatever, when you're running your fingers down the keys.
It's more like a scale, probably.
No, not a scale, because those are one at a time. I'm talking about when you run your finger down. Anyway, the game really replicates that feeling well, and it does just a good job of having that music rhythm gameplay looking through the lens of I'm playing a piano. The other music rhythm game I should note is a series of games called Frederick, based on, I want to say, Frederick Chopin or something like that. Again, music rhythm games, not as good as Demo, but way better than anything you'll find in this app.
Okay. So the other worst game that you put on here is
I have a few more.
You have a couple more.
Yeah.
Night Vision. Oh, this sounds so bad.
Night Vision is a gimmick, and that's fine as long as it does a gimmick. Well, it doesn't. The gimmick is this. If you look at your Nintendo Switch and you look at your right Joy-Con, only your right Joy-Con, the left Joy-Con doesn't have this. The right Joy-Con, on the very bottom, you will notice a dark panel on the Joy-Con facing like downward. This black panel hides an infrared camera that almost nothing on the Nintendo Switch actually uses. Ooh. The Nintendo Labo games use it. Let's see, Ring Fit Adventure uses it to measure your heartbeat. And there are like maybe a few other things. But for the most part, this is something that Nintendo tossed into it on a whim and just is barely used for anything. But it's there. And an infrared camera doesn't measure light the same way a normal camera does. It measures, well, infrared, which I'm not going to pretend to fully understand the science behind it, but basically it's not a normal camera. However, it does mean that this camera can detect things even when there is no light, and so this developer probably thought, hey, we can probably use this as a fun gimmick. We can make it like a little night vision camera where you can spy using the thing. Okay. First of all, yes, it is an infrared camera. It is not a good infrared camera. The frame rate in the camera itself is terrible, and the distance that it can detect is not too great either. Like, you'll get maybe a few feet before it stops being able to detect things. And it has like an overlay to make it seem more cool or whatever, and that's it. That's all this is a terrible night vision camera that doesn't work beyond a few feet, has a terrible frame rate, and doesn't do anything. You can't take pictures with it. You can't use multiple right Joy-Cons to have multiple cameras going at a time, like, oh, I'm spying around my entire room and looking for intrusion. No. This is as bare bones as you can get working with this gimmicky idea, and it barely works at all. And that's not necessarily the game designer's fault, because it's kind of a problem with the hardware itself. The hardware wasn't designed for much more, but they didn't have to make this game, this application, this whatever. And it's just so useless. Even for a gimmicky application, it's not useful for anything beyond a few seconds of, well, that's interesting, I guess. Anyway, what else is there?
There's Trivia for Dummies.
Oh, geez. So, I think I said in my review of this that this may very well be the worst trivia game I have ever played. And I want to make it clear, Trivia for Dummies is a licensed product. This is actually using this, like when you go into the store and get a self-help book, baking for dummies, or woodworking for dummies.
Okay.
Yeah, this is the same license as those. It is a fully licensed product, and I feel like the license holders of that license should get their money back, because this game is a horrible game. So when you are selecting your trivia answers, you don't actually pick the answer. You highlight the answer, and then you have to wait for the clock to wind down.
Ew.
You know, if there's, I don't recall if it's like 15 or 20 seconds or something. You're just sitting there doing nothing while the clock winds down. And beyond that, it's just a pretty boring trivia game. It doesn't do anything especially interesting. Like, every now and then you'll have a trivia question accompanied by a photo, but the photo doesn't really have any bearing on the question. It's like, it'll have a question about some celebrity, and it'll put on a photo of a celebrity, and it's like, that doesn't really help me answer the question. It's just a photo of the person. And it would be different if it had a photo of the person every single time, but it's just, on rare occasion, it decides to have a little bit extra to make you wonder, could they actually have made this game at least a little interesting? No, they didn't want to.
Ooh.
They didn't want to make it interesting. And the thing that really takes the cake here, even if you don't care that it is a super boring trivia game with terrible controls where it's going to force you to wait out every single question it asks you, it only supports 2 players.
What? If I have a trivia night, there's going to be more than 2 players.
Yeah! And it's like, if you want a trivia game on the Nintendo Switch, you have tons of great options, thanks largely to the Jackbox people.
Yes.
They've made a series of great trivia games. And I feel like this one, like, the only thing it has going for it is its license. And no, it's terrible. It's terrible. Do not get this game. It is a terrible
I'd rather
game.
play Jackbox, which is
Me too.
a great game.
Yeah.
If you need, like, a party game, that's a great game.
Lots of variety, regardless of which one you pick. And some are better than others, I feel. But even if you pick the worst of the lot, it's going to be
a lot better than this.
Better than this.
Yeah. All right, so let's move on to the hidden gems.
Okay.
The first one is KORG Gadget.
Korg Gadget.
Korg. Corgi.
No, it's not Corgi. Jen is a dog person.
I very much am.
Yeah, so that's where that came from. Is Corgi your favorite dog?
It is my favorite dog breed. It's one of them.
Oh, jeez. You know what? We'll list them on a different podcast. We'll get all of your dog thoughts. Or people can send us a message requesting all of your thoughts on dogs. But we're not talking about corgis. We're talking about Korg Gadget. Now, I said that I spent a week reviewing apps on the Nintendo Switch. And this one is kind of a curious app because this is a music creation application. And it is specifically a professional music creation application. This is the kind of thing I could picture someone going out on stage and actually using this app in real time to do some like DJ work or something, or using it to actually create a multi-track song. And for what it is aiming to be and what it's aiming to do, it is extremely good. However, I put the caveat in this of this is also extremely complex, and it is clearly designed for people who know what the heck they're doing.
And don't mind spending $48.
It is a expensive app. I would feel like if you are the target audience for this app, and this is a very narrow target audience, you are someone who not only has a passion for creating music, but also some idea of what you're doing and some aptitude for it. If that is the case, I would suspect that this will be worth the price. But only if you... Oh, and, not only do you have an interest in making music and an aptitude for it, some kind of idea of what you're doing, but you want to do it on the go. Because if you're at home and you want to create music, odds are good you're probably going to be using the computer to do that.
Yeah.
If you really want to do that, just like on the bus, like be building a actual genuine professional song, this will do that. And it has a lot of really fantastic tools for that, but it's not a casual thing. If you are just some rando who's like, I'd like to make music, this will provide you with the tools for that, and it gives you a very brief tutorial on the basics of starting that, but it is not going to hold your hand on how to go about doing that. And there are a lot of tools in here where there is no explanation for how to use it. It's just, if you know what you're doing, you'll know what this is, and you'll be glad that it's here. If you don't know what you're doing, just maybe leave that alone.
I would not expect to find something like that on the Switch.
I would say the same, except Cord has actually been a supporter of Nintendo's handheld platforms for a while. I believe they made other gadgets on the Nintendo 3DS, and I want to say maybe even the Nintendo DS. This is a professional company that makes music equipment, and so they know what they're doing. And again, very narrow target audience, the number of Nintendo Switch owners who have the capability to use this app and the desire to do it in a portable. But if that is you, you want this. It's good.
Okay. Next up is Motif.
Motif is complete opposite end of the spectrum. We just talked about something that is very narrow, very specific.
And very complicated.
Motif is very broad and general, very easy to get into, very accessible and simple. It is a puzzle game. I believe it's only like $3.
Yes.
So super inexpensive to get into. And the basic idea is you are given a group of geometric shapes that you need to arrange in a kind of kaleidoscopic pattern. So everything is being mirrored, and based on that, you need to arrange them to reproduce another shape. And like I said, very simple, easy premise to get. But there's still some challenge there. You still need to kind of try and figure out where everything's supposed to go. And there is a ton of content in this game. 300
puzzles.
Yeah. So for $3, basically it's a penny a puzzle.
Yeah.
And that's if you don't get it on sale.
Mm-hmm.
If you are looking for... It's a very minimalist puzzle game. It's just like black and white. You're literally just basically creating snowflakes.
Mm.
But for what it is, it's really good. It does a good job of giving you content for money. And if all you want is a fun little simple puzzle game on the Switch, this is a great one to go for.
Okay. The next one kind of makes me giggle.
Oh.
The next one is Behold the Kickman.
Behold the Kickman!
So this is supposed to be a soccer game.
Mm-hmm.
Except it's made by somebody who doesn't know how soccer is played.
So I spent an entire week playing sports games in my lead up to Nintendo Switch Sports.
Uh-huh.
In my lead up to the release of that game, and hopefully my review of that game, as of this recording, the game is not yet out, so I can't really speak to that too much. But out of all the games that I played on Nintendo Switch during that week, there were two that stood out to me as far as really good sports games. No, three. Behold the Kickmen, Captain Tsubasa, and Dunk Lords. But of those three, Behold the Kickmen was probably the one that surprised me the most. So the premise behind this one is this is a soccer game made by someone who has no clue how soccer is played, has no interest in finding out how soccer is played, but because you can kind of get enough stuff from just being in this world, knowing how soccer is played, is basically like, well, here's how I think soccer is played based on everything that I've heard everyone else talking about and I've seen in like movies and stuff. And the funny thing is for a guy who has, or for a creator rather, I don't know if it's a guy or a team or what, for a creator who has zero interest in soccer, they actually put together a pretty good soccer game. Granted, it is not by any means an accurate soccer game. There's all kinds of really wildly inconsistent stuff, and the game just runs with that. Like, the players are called Kickmen. They have this story in the game where they talk about everything like soccer is larger than life, and, everybody is a hero and on this epic quest to become the ultimate Kickman. And it's so ridiculous and silly, but the mechanics of the gameplay are really solid. Like, it's rare that I play a soccer game that plays this well, which makes it all the more frustrating that it doesn't have multiplayer because it's so accessible, and the graphics are not all that impressive, and it's like, if they really took this a bit farther, this could have been one of the best soccer games I've ever played, which is funny because it started from a point of I have zero interest in soccer. Here's a soccer game I made when I have zero interest in soccer. And darned if they didn't do a good job, and it's just frustrating that they didn't put a little more into it to make it even better. But even as it is, it's still really fun.
And $4 too.
Yeah, super cheap. So if you're looking for a very silly, not at all realistic take on the sport of soccer, behold the Kickmen. Behold them. Behold them.
All right, last one for this category is Zoomania Magic Casual Puzzle.
Zoomania is, how can I put this lightly? It's a copycat game. It's really just ripping off the formula of Zuma.
Okay.
But I always say it's not necessarily a terrible thing for a game to be a copycat so long as it's a good copycat. Mm-hmm. And Zoomania is a good copycat. And given that we do not have the actual game Zuma on Nintendo Switch yet, for some reason, EA and PopCap Games have not brought their wonderful collection of older games to Nintendo Switch, which is a huge oversight. Given that absence, Zoomania is the best substitute you could hope for. It doesn't have the same personality of Zuma. The gameplay isn't quite as good and nuanced as Zuma, but it's close.
Okay.
It is a good match 3 puzzle game. You know, you got all the marbles going to the goal, and you're trying to shoot marbles at them to get them to clear. The mechanics work well. It's fun to play. It has good touchscreen controls. It has decent gamepad controls. Of course, if you have Joy-Con drift, that's going to mess with it. Mm-hmm. But overall, it's a good substitute for a game that we should have gotten on Nintendo Switch years ago. But given that we haven't, this is a good kind of replacement for that.
Okay. So, let's go to the best games category.
Since you skipped it, sure.
And we'll start with not a game.
Not a game.
YouTube.
I said I spent a week reviewing apps on Nintendo Switch, and I felt like it would be important to highlight what I felt was the best streaming app on Nintendo Switch. Actually looking at this from I've played these apps on other platforms. I usually watch my videos and stuff on the PlayStation, or, for YouTube, often on the PC or my phone. And so multiple apps have made their way to the Nintendo Switch, multiple video apps. You have your Hulu, you have your Crunchyroll. Mm-hmm. Crunchyroll, by the way, terrible on Switch. I'm really frustrated with Crunchyroll on Switch. Hulu's good on Switch. However, for your money, which is funny because it won't cost you anything to use it, YouTube, I think, makes the transition to Nintendo Switch the best. It's still not quite as usable with the touchscreen as you might want, but it's usable enough. It works well. There isn't any problem with latency or frame rates or anything like that, or I don't know the exact words I'm looking for. But also, YouTube kind of gives users a back door to do something that they can't do otherwise. So, personally, on my PlayStation 4, I use the app Vudu because I have a collection of digital films. Mm-hmm. I have hundreds of them. And it's really great to be able to go through my library and pick a movie. That app is not on Nintendo Switch. But you can kind of fake it and watch all those movies that you stream using Movies Anywhere. The service is called Movies Anywhere. You can use YouTube to do that. And I have instructions in my review for how to do that. I'm not going to go into them here. And given that this actually enables you to watch your movie collection on Nintendo Switch, I feel like that gives it a lot more utility than just YouTube would on its own. And so that makes me feel like this is the best video streaming app on the Nintendo Switch.
All right, so on to the actual game.
Games, I have a couple of games in my best games for the month.
All right. This one actually costs $6.
Yes.
It's called Explosion Aid DX.
Not Explosion Aid.
Explosion Aid.
Like lemonade. And it's based on a really dumb joke in the game. It's like, making lemonade out of lemons. Well, I have grenades, so I'm making explosionade.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, it's really silly, but that's kind of the tone this game sets.
Mm-hmm.
And the premise behind this game is it's a series of single-screen action platformer levels where you're going inside this mech and shooting a bunch of enemies using two-stick shooter mechanics. But the thing that's cool about it is it has a couple of really unique systems that make it really fun to move around and attack enemies. One of them is the shield anti-grav mechanic, where at any point you can activate a shield. The shield only has so much power, so you can't keep it on indefinitely. And the shield also keeps you from shooting. But the interesting thing it does is, while the shield is on, your mech has zero gravity. So if you are falling down and then you turn on your shield, you will slam into the ground, bounce off of it, and fly up into the air again. And what's more, even though you can't shoot enemies, you can bash yourself into them. And so it gives you this whole other mechanic to attack enemies. There are a few mechanics in the game like this, and it's just really fun overall. I feel like I wish the game had more content. I wish, man, it would be nice if this game had a level creator or something, but even beyond that, I wish the game had more levels. But barring that, given the price tag is so low, I'd say this is worth the price of entry just for how good the gameplay is. So if you like action platformers, I originally played this back on the Xbox 360 via the Xbox Indie program, and I still love it. It's still a great game. So definitely give it a try.
Last one for the best games. Brothers, A Tale of Two Sons.
Speaking of games I first played on the Xbox 360, here's another oldie but goodie. And it's just as good now as it first was, if not better. I mean, there's extra stuff in this release, like a director commentary and all that. But the main idea behind this game is this is a puzzle game where you are controlling two characters, each one using a different analog stick. And technically this game can be played in two-player. It is not meant to be played as a two-player game. This is a one-player game where one person controls two characters. And a part of the fun is kind of trying to coordinate your movements on, using the two sticks. But what's really amazing about this game is its storytelling. This is a beautiful game. Even though it's a decade old, this is a beautiful game that uses really good non-narrative storytelling. You don't have any spoken language that you can understand. The characters speak a gibberish language that's made
right
up. There's no text on screen telling you what's going on, aside from the very basic what you need to tell you how to control the game. And throughout the entire game, you're seeing these characters interact and come up with ideas together and react to things that are in their environment. And it's all conveying this information very well just through the characters' tone and their actions and the actions on screen. And it tells a very emotional story, too. And I'm not going to spoil it, but I will say the ending in this game is one of the best examples of using gameplay to tell storytelling in a video game. I cannot imagine this story being told in another medium anywhere near as well as it is here.
All right, so a couple of small announcements. Nintendo Switch Online expansion packs, Nintendo 64 app, and Sega Genesis app releases for April 2022 includes Mario Golf, Shining Force 2, Sonic Spinball, Space Harrier 2. And the Nintendo Switch Online Nintendo Entertainment System and Super Nintendo Entertainment System releases for March 2022 include Dig Dug 2, Mappy Land, Earthworm Jim 2, Super Mario World SP, and Super Punch-Out SP.
So I'm including the March releases here because that came out after we recorded our last podcast. I'll just kind of run through these real quick. Mario Golf is good, but it has aged quite a lot. It's still worth playing, but it's not going to hold a candle to the Mario Golf that just came out on Nintendo Switch.
Right.
Shining Force 2, Sonic Spinball, and Space Harrier 2, all to different degrees, are worth playing. They're good games, but all of them were already available on the Nintendo Switch via the Sega Genesis Classics collection. And it's frustrating to have an entire month where the only Genesis games you're getting are games that you already had. Of those three, I'd say Shining Force 2 is probably the best of the bunch. It's a really good strategy RPG. The other two are still okay, at least. They're still worth playing. But, I mean, if you really wanted to play them on your Switch, you could have been doing so for years now. For the Nintendo and Super Nintendo games, the way that I expressed it when it first came out, when I reviewed them then, was none of these games were games that anyone was asking for, but they're pretty good. Dig Dug 2 is a weird take on the original Dig Dug formula that kind of works. It's interesting, it's different, and I like it. I think it's aged well. Earthworm Jim 2, again, for its time, had really amazing graphics, a great soundtrack, good gameplay, although it's gameplay that, again, has aged somewhat. A lot of blind jumps and stuff. But overall, a good game. Mappy Land, I did not think aged well. It's not good. And then Super Mario World SP is basically Super Mario World with all of the levels and everything unlocked, which I guess if you just want to go to a specific level is a good way to do that. And the same idea with Super Punch-Out SP. That's Super Punch-Out with all of the different tiers of tournaments or whatever unlocked, so you can just go straight to the one you want to play. I feel like that has a bit less value because if you are good enough to actually fight through the earlier fighters, it won't be a challenge for you. And if you are not, then the later ones will maul you to pieces. So I feel like skipping ahead to the later levels isn't really doing you many favors. Anyway, so that was my thoughts on the last month or so of Nintendo Switch Online releases. All in all, okay. I mean, there's definitely... I could have hoped for more in some areas, but there's some stuff there worth playing at least.
So have you heard that E3 is canceled this year?
Yeah. I mean... Not a very big surprise.
No, I think we all saw this coming.
Well, given that they hadn't made any announcements earlier in the year, and game companies need that lead time to prepare their stuff for this show, yeah, kind of obvious. And so it was kind of up in the air of, are they going to do a physical show? Are they going to do something digital? And if they're going to do something digital, why would anyone pay to join a digital thing when they can just release their stuff online, like Nintendo does with Nintendo Direct?
Right.
And it kind of has a lot of people asking, is the idea of E3 obsolete? Do we even need an E3 anymore?
I personally, having been to an E3, and you have been to, I think, more than one, actually.
Oh, yeah. I went to many.
So I went to one. It was the first one that became public after so many years of not being public. I was very disappointed in that experience. Sorry.
So... When I went to E3, that was before you went. I went before
several
they opened
years
it up to the public.
before, yeah.
It has been, at least a decade, probably more than a decade, since I've last been to E3. And even before they opened it up to the public, it was fun, but it was frustrating and it was exhausting because the crowds were horrendous.
And they still were when I went.
Oh, I'm sure they were worse when you went because
yeah.
Once you open it up to the public, then you're looking at even worse. I understand why they did it, money.
Yeah.
But, it was having problems even before then with all the crowds, with all the, if you wanted to go in to play the big new game in Nintendo's booth, for example, you would literally have to wait all day to get to it in some of these events. And that's just not conducive to a press who's supposed to be going there to cover games. Mm-hmm. And then they opened it up to the general public, and it's like, that makes it even worse for that purpose. And it's like, okay, at this point, if you want to make a bunch of game demos available to the general public, you already have a way of doing that. You can use digital distribution to do that. And a lot of companies do that. So that doesn't really serve a purpose as far as E3 goes. For game companies that want to expose their product to the press, well, these days a lot of them just use the digital direct format, and that gives them a way to do that more easily. Or if they want to bring a playable build to a press outlet, they will just approach that press outlet being like, hey, do you want to play this game we have in the works? And that works for them.
Mm-hmm.
Alternately, if they're looking for an event to do networking, if it's like, we have a game we've been working on, but we're seeking a publisher, or...
That can also be done behind closed doors, though.
We're trying, but that's just it, is E3 historically was a good place for everyone to gather where you could do that. That's how, like, Guitar Hero became a known entity. Because here was this teeny little indie developer, at the time at least, Harmonix and Red Octane, developing this game. And then everybody noticed it, and it became huge. And it was a good opportunity for them to make deals with publishers and stuff to be like, hey, can you help us bring this to market? And eventually, they worked out a deal with Activision, and that's all history now. That could not happen in the current era E3 because it's just too crowded, too much of a cluster fudge. And I'm watching my language here. However, there are other events that exist for this. If you want an event that's good for networking, that's kind of what Game Developer Conference has become. If you want an event that's good for opening your new upcoming game to the general public so that people in public can play it, that's kind of what PAX has become.
Yep.
And so with these other events out there, it kind of circles back around to the question of what do we need E3 for? And when the pandemic first started, I feel like a lot of us felt like, oh, we really miss E3. We want that to come back. And the pandemic is still kind of a thing, but it's winding down. And we're coming out of it at this point going, for everything that this event does, we kind of have better options for that now.
I think the internet just killed E3.
To some extent, yeah. But I feel like one of the major blows came when Sony just decided at some point, we don't need to do this anymore. Yeah, we're just not doing this anymore. And so that, even before the pandemic started, that kind of crippled E3 a bit. And then Nintendo was still going to E3, but at the same time they were releasing these Nintendo Directs, and a lot of people started saying, all this information I get about these great Nintendo games, I get about the same amount of information from a Nintendo Direct as I do when they go to E3. I'm perfectly fine with them just releasing a Direct and calling it a day. Which I'm sure to Nintendo has to look like, why are we spending our money on this E3 thing again?
Yeah, exactly.
Because they have to pay a fee to the ESA in order to attend E3. And all of these companies now have to be asking themselves, we can pop a video onto YouTube at any time.
Exactly.
Even smaller companies, Devolver Digital, has become huge with their Devolver Digital Directs. Why would they bother to attend E3? They mock the idea of there even being an E3 in the Devolver Digital Directs. Ooh. And so E3 has kind of become this joke, and it's like, what's the point anymore? And I feel like early on in the pandemic, a lot of people felt like we felt like E3 was something that was sorely missed. And now it's kind of like, I'm over it. I don't need it. It's fine.
I think it was just the COVID blues, maybe.
Maybe. Yeah.
So an interesting bit of news that also came out.
Mm-hmm.
There was a data leak.
Supposedly.
Allegedly,
yes.
Where certain platforms might be coming to NSO.
Now, as I understand it, and I'm not intimately familiar with the details of this, this is a leak that dates back to, I want to say, like 2019.
Ooh.
Like that was the year that this build was out. So I'm not sure how imminent this is, or if it's even still a thing. take it with a grain of salt. This might happen at some point. It might never happen. But do not feel like just because you're reading about this in the recent weeks, that this means like this is something that's going to be happening this year or in a month or anytime soon. Like I said, this might never happen. But the fact that Nintendo was apparently looking into this has a lot of people's imaginations buzzing about the Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance potentially coming to Nintendo Switch Online in some form. Now, is that the base tier? Is that the expansion pack tier? Is that some new paid tier? I mean, we can only speculate what that would even be if it even happens. But there's a lot of good games on those platforms, and hey, it would be great to play them on Nintendo Switch. A part of what I've been doing this year, because they're closing the Nintendo 3DS and Wii U eShops, is I have been reviewing virtual console games, some of them being Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance, because we are not able to play those on Nintendo Switch at this time and may never be able to play them. So the idea that, hey, maybe they actually will bring them to Nintendo Switch is... I mean, it's nice. I hope it happens, but who knows? I guess we'll see.
You know, I remember having a Game Boy Color and a Game Boy Advance. Mm-hmm. I don't remember any other game I played on it aside from Pokemon and a Monster Rancher game.
You played the Mario game, too. You told me about that.
Yes, okay. So I played that. I don't remember anything else, though. I really don't.
Did you have other games?
Maybe?
Wait, you said you played Game Boy Advance as well. Do you not remember any games you played on Game Boy Advance?
I really don't, now that I think about it.
See, that's bizarre to me, because for me, the Game Boy Advance was an incredibly amazing platform. It had so many good games on it.
Okay, so what games did you play?
Are we talking about all three? Are we talking about Game Boy Advance?
Just Game Boy Advance.
Okay, we'll start with Game Boy Advance then.
Uh-huh.
If I'm talking about the best games, the games that I want to make sure... Like, if it's coming to Nintendo Switch Online, these games better come to Nintendo Switch Online with it.
Uh-huh.
My mind first goes to Metroid Zero Mission and Metroid Fusion.
Nope, never played those.
I know.
Uh-huh.
Not your type of game anyway.
No, and it's not.
But it's like, currently, on the Nintendo Switch, we can play the entire original 2D Metroid saga, except for Metroid 4, Metroid Fusion.
Mm.
And Metroid Zero Mission is the best version of the original Metroid. Like, it's way better than the first Metroid game. The first Metroid game, as far as I'm concerned, it has aged incredibly poorly. It is not a good game by today's standards. Metroid Zero Mission, on the other hand, is probably the second best 2D Metroid game, just behind Super Metroid. And even then, like, I don't know, I really liked Zero Mission. It was really good. So, those games come to my mind. The original WarioWare
Nope.
Micro Games Inc.
Never played those either.
I mean, you basically told me you don't remember any Game Boy Advance games. So you're just going to say, nope, I don't remember that, don't remember that.
I really don't. Maybe I really did spend just that much time playing Pokemon.
Maybe. I mean, if we're talking about Pokemon, I have a fondness for Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire.
I did play the crap out of that. I did.
That was a good one. Let's see. If we're talking about great Game Boy Advance games, all of the Fire Emblem games, we need to get those. Those are great. They should not be lost to time. I would say Advance Wars 1 and 2, but we're already getting those, presumably, in the remake that's coming out, hopefully at some point. I know that they had to delay it because of actual real-life war, but... yeah, I still want that. They're good games. Let's see, what else comes to mind on Game Boy Advance? Ooh, they had a lot of good re-releases. There's a lot of stuff that's already made its way over, like the Castlevania games, but we don't need those because we've got them.
Mm-hmm.
What else comes to mind? Well, Zelda the Minish Cap, that was a good Zelda game.
I really just spent a lot of time playing Pokemon.
Mario Kart Super Circuit, that was a solid take on the original Super Mario Kart.
Didn't have that either. Wow. My childhood really was just Pokemon.
I know a lot of people will say Golden Sun, the Golden Sun series. I never got super into that, but I respect it's a well-liked RPG. I mean, if we're talking about games that released on Game Boy Advance, we still have yet to get Final Fantasy VI, on the Nintendo Switch in any form, and that released on Game Boy Advance. And my mind goes to weird, obscure games. Like, there was a game called Carnage, which was a good top-down racing game. There was a port of Mega Man and Bass, which we still have yet to get on Nintendo Switch. Or Bass? I think it's Bass, because he has a little cat robot buddy called Treble.
Oh.
See, now that I'm on the spot, I'm not remembering stuff.
Well, I mean, we can always look it up later.
Yeah. So what about Game Boy Color? You said you only played those games. You played Pokemon, Super Mario Bros. Deluxe.
So my memory of both the Game Boy Color and the Game Boy Advance in terms of games meshes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think I played the Monster Rancher game on the Game Boy Color. Mm-hmm. But I could be wrong. I don't know. I'd have to actually go and use Google and figure out which games that I played.
See, when I think about great Game Boy Color games, the first thing that I think of is they made a remake of Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening on Game Boy Color that was really good. But we kind of don't need that since we got another remake of that same game on Nintendo Switch. Technically, it was an original Game Boy game, but Donkey Kong, sometimes referred to as Donkey Kong 94, is an amazing game. It's really, really good. Like, even by today's standards, it is an incredible puzzle platformer. Like, it takes the original arcade game and expands upon it like tenfold to be this massive puzzle platformer that's really fantastic. Let's see. There was a Bionic Commando game. I don't remember the title of it. Bionic Commando something. That was a great sequel to an NES classic. Good action platformer game. Let's see. And if we're talking about the original Game Boy, I already reviewed a bunch of the original Kirby games that come to mind, like Kirby's Pinball Land. The original Kirby's Dream Land was good, and its sequel. Let's see. Oh, Link's Awakening and... Well, I already mentioned Link's Awakening. I didn't mention the two kind of follow-up games to Link's Awakening, Oracle of the Ages and Oracle of the Seasons, which were actually made by Capcom, oddly enough. And they were solid Zelda games that were both different games. They were paired together, so a lot of people mistakenly assumed that it was like a Pokemon Red, Pokemon Blue thing. But they're completely different games that just happen to communicate with one another and transfer information back and forth. Really excellent games. Let's see. The Wario Land series, of course. Great platformers. And Super Mario Land. Super Mario Land 1 was good. Super Mario Land 2 was excellent.
See, none of these are ringing a bell for me.
The original Tetris. I mean, yeah, we have great versions of Tetris now, like Tetris Effect, but there's something to be said for the classic, the original Tetris on Game Boy. Which, granted, was not the first version of Tetris by any measure, but it's the first version that most people were exposed to because that was the bundled game with Game Boy. Okay,
so, to the last bit of news.
Yes.
The last bit of sad news.
Yeah, you could look at it that way. I mean,
okay. So, Zelda Breath of the Wild 2 has been delayed.
Yes, it is delayed into 2023, which...
I am okay with this.
A lot of industry insiders kind of assumed that this was likely to happen because the big Zelda games often get delayed. And yeah, I'm kind of okay with this too. I mean, I'm on the same page with, I'm sure, all of you listening right now. Yes, the great games that I want to play them as soon as I can play them. But that is based on this idea that they're actually going to be in good shape.
Yeah, I don't want to play a piece of turd.
I don't want another Cyberpunk to happen.
And I also don't want to experience disappointment when I saw you play Pokemon Legends Arceus. it was not
you
very
experienced
polished.
Disappointment. I thoroughly enjoyed it, but I understand what you're saying.
Yeah,
it could have used more time to get more polish. Yes.
And I'm really hoping...
Still one of my favorite games of the year so far, but I get what you're saying.
Yeah, and I really hope Pokemon Scarlet and Pokemon Violet aren't rushed.
Already in the videos, they look pretty polished, but...
But you never know.
But at the same time, I do see, like, one of the issues that exists both in Pokemon Legends Arceus and in Monster Hunter Rise as well. If you are looking off into the distance and seeing these creatures roaming around, the frame rate for the creatures off in the distance is really choppy.
Yeah.
It's an issue in Kirby and the Forgotten Land, and if you look at the videos for Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, this is an issue in that as well. And I feel like Nintendo is just kind of shrugging its shoulders, being like, deal.
Yeah.
It's just how we're doing things now. Which is a little frustrating, but...
I feel like that's a constraint of the system.
Yeah. And at the same time, it's like, even with that flaw, Monster Hunter Rise was a gorgeous game.
Yes.
So, I can live with that as long as the rest of the game is polished. Pokemon Legends Arceus, for all that I loved it, I thought it was a great game. I had more fun with that than any Pokemon game in recent memory. But it was not a polished game. It was janky in a number of areas.
Yeah.
And yeah, if the big new Zelda game comes out and it's janky like that, that's going to be disappointing. Technically, the original Breath of the Wild had some areas where it had issues with frame rates and stuff.
Yeah, but it didn't detract from my enjoyment of the game.
It didn't detract from my enjoyment much. When you go into the Chicory Woods in that game, it gets really choppy. And that's fine, because you're not really doing much in that area aside from talking to characters. You're not like doing anything that involves a lot of quick gameplay or fights or anything. But still, it's been over 5 years now since the Breath of the Wild game, the first Breath of the Wild game rather, came out. I would hope that its sequel shows a marked improvement in visual quality and, again, in polish, especially since they're delaying it like this. And you know what? If it comes out and it has gotten that, I will not be upset about the delay at all. Again, much rather have that than have a cyberpunk kind of situation.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that the folks at CD Projekt Red hate that they have become the example for everyone not to follow. But you know what? That's on them. They were the ones who messed up. They know they messed up. They knew they were messing up even before they released it, but they decided to still go ahead and release it like that. And now everyone's laughing at them. I'm sure Nintendo does not want to be in that position.
Yep. All right. So that wraps things up for this month's eShopperReviews podcast. Again, we want to thank all of our patrons on Patreon for contributing. Patreon donors are the first ones to gain access.
Sorry.
Patreon...
I'm keeping that in. Why not?
Patreon donors are the first ones to gain access to these podcasts, and if you are interested in becoming a donor, please check out our Patreon page at patreon.com/eShopperReviews. And once again, if you're curious to read any of the reviews or content mentioned in this podcast, you can find it on the eShopperReviews subreddit at reddit.com/r/eShopperReviews. Once again, this has been Jen Ip.
And Jake McNeil.
We'll see you next month, and in the meantime, we both hope you found this content helpful and enjoyed some good games. Catch you all next time.
Later!